This is the narrated PowerPoint on Chapter 2, the research phases and getting started. So the present, the beginning of the semester, is a good time to start thinking about your final project. And the first chapter laid out some different theoretical approaches that you could take. To put it in a nutshell, what you need to start thinking about is, do you want to do some type of a study, or would you like to do a research paper? In other words, would you like to do actual research, or would you like to write about doing it, or types of research that have been done in the past? I put a note up on Folio News. We are limited right now in terms of doing face-to-face interactions because of COVID-19. That doesn't mean that you can't do human subjects research. You can still interview somebody, but you would need to use Zoom. You just can't do it in person. Doing other things like shadowing would be a little bit more difficult. So, but you could look into something like interviewing. We're just going to touch on it very briefly, and certainly learning more about interviewing would be worth a 2,000 word research paper. Or shadowing. Or think aloud protocol, which is related to usability studies. Or you could do something about a violation of research method ethics. And in addition to the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and the Milgram experiment, I've also listed the Stanford prison experiment. And there's links to all those for a little bit of reading up on the Folio website under content for this week. Your text gets into talking about how studies are structured, and what they talk about looks a lot like what we refer to as the IMRAD structure, and that's the Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion framework. This is often used in both the physical and life sciences, as well as in the social sciences and in education. The introduction is important. They talk a little bit about generating the research question too as well, or research questions, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. But it's also where the review of the literature takes place. And some of you may have written reviews of the literature in high school or even in college. And very often, if you go on and do a master's degree, the review of the literature is a chapter in your thesis or dissertation, and it's the length could be anywhere from 10 to 20 pages or even longer. The review of the literature that typically takes place in the introduction is not nearly as long. It might be a paragraph or two, and it may even lead you to what you use as an investigative tool in your methods section. That is, for example, you may discover a survey through reviewing the literature that you then use and perhaps alter to better fit your own needs in your methods section. But the methods section is where you describe what you've done to gather data. And then, of course, the results is what you discovered, the data that you actually collected. And then the discussion is when you write about the implications and their importance to your field in general. And the discussion could also conceivably point the reader towards where more research needs to be done. So your text talks about how the research question emerges from the problem's description. You go in by giving background. That's very often describing the problem, and then talking about a research goal, and from those you get your research questions, which you may refine even further into more of a statement. But I also liked the example of serif versus sans serif fonts and how they might be uh, more useful or not for particular types of writing. Generally, what they're talking about with a serif font is one that has a little has a foot on it. And what you're looking at here on this slide is Georgia. Georgia is a serif font, and the what you can see, like the P has got a foot, and the R and the T, the capital ones there. And what's regarded as being good about serif fonts is that it's easier to read. It gives your eyes something to hold on to as it travels across the page. Now, a sans serif font would be something like Helvetica. They don't have any of those little feet down at the bottom, and it's regarded as being more difficult to read. Now, Helvetica is less expensive to print. Um, that's true in general of sans serif fonts. So that's another reason that the idea of the type of font is worth looking into. So a little bit more about human subjects research. I would like to know if you're interested in doing human subjects research right away. And so we might ask ourselves, what is human subjects research? Well, it's anything that you're doing that will give you any type of interaction with a human being. And you can see here this definition is from the IRB website here at Georgia Southern. And you can see that a human subject is a living individual or a biospecimen about whom an investigator is conducting research. What they're really concerned about is not having another Tuskegee experiment or another Milgram experiment or another Stanford prison experiment on their hands, especially the first one, the Tuskegee experiment. But the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiment, as you'll see, cause psychological harm, and there's certainly something to be concerned about. And of course, you could write a research paper on these, learning more about them and their significance, what others have had to say about them. Let me just say I'm not interested in simply a narrative telling me what happened. There's tons of books that can tell us that. But what you would need to do is you could include a summary of what happened, but then you want to tell us more about the significance, about the impact that it made upon the field of study, upon IRBs and things like that. As studies like the Tuskegee experiment and the other two, those are reasons that we have IRB offices now. IRB, by the way, stands for Internal Review Board, and it's composed of people from different disciplines in a university who review all the research that's being done with human subjects on a campus. Questions? I'll see you online.